So there's this bloke, see, and he's got a mule, and between them, him and the bloke, they make a living. They go from town to town, and in between the town the mule grazes, and when the mule gets to the towns, he shows what he's made of, and the bloke takes the mule dung and he sells it to whoever wants it for fertilising their gardens and such like things. And it works very well after a fashion. But one day they come to a much larger town than he's used to going to. And he goes down a street of goldsmiths, and that's all right. And he goes down a street full of fishmongers, and that's all right. And then he goes down a street full of tanners, and even that's all right. And then he goes down a street of grocers, and out in front of each of the grocers there is an apprentice there with his mortar and his pestle grinding away at spices, and it's filling the street with the redolent aroma of outremer and Araby, and the bloke takes one whiff and gasps and keels over and crashes down to the floor, and a crowd gathers round, but there's nothing it seems that anyone can do until one chap steps forward, dressed in dark robes, clearly a scholar, and he says, "I'm a doctor, let me through, I know what must be done." So the crowd parts, and he reaches down to behind the mule where it's shown what it's worth, and he grabs that up, and he shoves the dung right under the bloke's nose, and the bloke sniffs and gasps, and his eyes pop open, and he springs back up on his feet, and he shakes the scholar warmly by the hand and grabs up the mule's harness, and off they trot as though nothing had happened. And the crowd are amazed, and they turn to the doctor and say to him, Doctor, what wisdom is it that you used to cure this man?" And the doctor says, "Well, that was simple. You see, I know it's all simply a question of what you're used to." And then they say, That's amazing, doctor. Tell us, what are you a doctor of?" And the doctor says, "Friends, this is Leuven. I'm a doctor of philosophy." Doctor of philosophy. Well, Hans tells it better than me, but Hans isn't here right now. So the reason we got onto mules was because we've had to hire one. We hired one for 4 days in order to move. Well, it was to do with swords. Well, not the swords themselves. We bought those a couple of weeks ago, as I think we talked about. And we've got lots of sort of bits of swords, more particularly, and that's sort of the point, which is that the swords need a lot of work. Many of them will need to be scaled. Many of them need to be bound. Some need new crosses, new pommels. Some of them will need to be rebated. All of them will need glazing. So that they sparkle and shine in what we hope is the early summer sunshine in a few weeks' time when the King's Triumph commences. And so we bought 1,000 sheets for glazing the swords, and we needed to move all of those, of course, from Mechelin, where we were last week, here back to Brussels, where we are this week. So we hired a mule and a hackney for riding, but a mule to carry the sheets. And Hans did not get on with this mule, no indeed. He swore at it in language that I would not care to understand the meaning of, and he called it corning, which I thought perhaps was a bad word of some sort. And I said, what are you calling it corning for? And he said, "It means king." And I said, you can't call the mule king. He said, "Why can't I call it? It's just like a king. It's obstinate and self-willed." And I said, "Well, you may say so, I couldn't possibly comment. And one thing's for sure, I'm not putting that down in the expenses, because if I put it down in the expenses, Derek the Page will read it, and if Derek the Page reads it, then my Master Edward will read it, and if Master Edward reads it, then the King might well read it, and then I'll be guilty of lèse-majesté or whatever. It'll be me that'll be hanged, drawn and quartered, so you keep your naming to yourself as far as the mule is concerned," which he didn't seem too happy about, but we left it at that. But it did get me thinking that, a bit like last week, we were talking about buckles and rivets and whatnot. The other thing that people don't really think about is the beasts, is it? Because when you start totting it up, it's a lot of animals. Even us, me and Dickon and Rafe and Hans, we've hired, to date, 11 horses. 11 horses, and that's not counting the horses, the draft horses, that will pull the wagons that we've hired and will continue to hire to move everything eventually back to Calais. Because that's 4 wagons, so that's probably 2 apiece. That's at least a score of horses, and that's just us lot. And there's lots more involved, isn't there? Because there's the king's interviewing the king's triumph, and all the dukes and earls and barons and knights and grooms and pages and yeomen, pretty much all of whom are going to have to ride, and many of them will have retinues, all of whom will have to ride. And so when you start adding all of that up, and then all those draft horses to pull all the wagons that bring all the stuff, because it's not just weapons and armour, it's pavilions and tents and furnaces and forges and mills and Lord knows what else. All of those things have to be brought over. So that's going to be thousands of horses. And that's just to get everybody and everything to the King's Triumph. I've not even started on the horses you need for the actual tilting, and that's a very particular kind of horse. So there's those, including my master and Robert Elvish and Master Sandring and Petty John. They're all out there. They've been out for months scouring the Low Countries and France and England for horses to be coursers to take part in the tilt and the tourney, because you need a very specific kind of animal. So you add all those into it, you've got thousands and thousands of horses. But to the best of my knowledge, only one mule. One mule, not our mule, mercifully, perhaps, or at least I don't think so. Actually, I don't think that would be appropriate, because our mule, Koning, would be seated beneath the holy posterior of His Grace, the Papal Legate, Cardinal, most powerful man in England, apart from the King, Thomas Wolsey. So I don't think it can really be Koning. But whichever mule it is, a mule it will most certainly be, because I'm told that when they process, as they will, to the interview of the kings, when the King of England and the French King first meet, those 2 great processions will meet, and the Cardinal will be there in the King's procession, humbly seated upon a mule, like unto Christ entering Jerusalem upon the back of an ass, humbly accompanied by all the archbishops and bishops and priests of England, and humbly preceded by the most inconsequential of giant gold crucifixes. But then I suppose it's all a question of what you're used to, right? Incidentally, you've been very quiet these last couple of weeks. If you've got any questions you want to ask me, you just ask away. I'm very happy indeed, by Lakin, indeed, to answer any questions you may have. But in the meantime, let's raise a pot, why do we not, to Mules and Monarchs.